And we begin. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Pareshat Korach. My apologies to those in Israel, but we will catch up. We'll get there. I hope we get to you as well at some point. Today's Parshat HaShavua class is sponsored by, number one, by David and Fran Wolf. It's in memory of Fran's mother, Rivka Reza, Bat Yehuda Tzvi Halevi, Alei Shalom. Yahrzeit is on the 4th of Tammuz, which is this coming Friday, so we thank you very much. And the Neshama should benefit from the study of Torah that we will be doing today. Today's shir is also sponsored by David and Riva Green, and it's to commemorate the yahrzeit of Chaya Bat Meir, who happens to be the mother of Aviva Rakov, Naomi Lipner, and of David. Today's the actual yahrzeit, so we thank you as well. The Neshama should benefit from the words of Torah. A few years ago, I was proctoring in chat, and it was there were several different exams taking place. One of them was Ivrit. And although a very strong percentage there of the kids are very strong, obviously there are some weaker in their Ivrit. And one of them turns to a teacher asking for some assistance during the exam to explain what a specific word is. So the student turns to this Israeli teacher and asks her, Maze, what does this word mean? Pointing at a specific word, and the word was machloket. And the Israeli teacher comes over to me with a shock. Ani lo mevin, she doesn't understand. How is it possible that you have a kid in a Jewish school that doesn't know what machloket is? That's all of Judaism is one big machloket. It makes absolutely no sense that the student doesn't know what is a machloket. So machloket is very much part of our DNA, right? We have many of them, unfortunately. And this parsha is without a doubt an opportunity to address the concept of machloket, but also there's a very significant message here that relates to the concept of a revolution. When there's an uprising, right? When there's a need for change. And the study of revolution is something that's done in departments of history and sociology to try to understand what drives a revolution, right? And especially a few years ago, when there were actual real revolutions in Tunisia, in Egypt, and there's a desire, people want to understand what brings about a revolution. Perhaps if you identify what causes it, perhaps you could somehow figure out a way to prevent it. So there's a very famous theory that's known as the Davies theory of political revolution. This is something that's even quoted now as there's turmoil south of the border. So this Davies theory of revolution from 1962 introduces the idea of what is known as the gap. In other words, revolutions, he claims, do not occur when circumstances are dire. Revolutions do not occur when people are extremely poor. And to prove it, there's a very significant percentage of humans on planet Earth that have very, very little in their countries. Millions of people in India barely have running water, and you could go through Africa and different areas of the world and know very well that they are lacking a tremendous amount of basic needs. There's no revolution. Revolution takes place when a population has expectations and things that people believe that they have the right to obtain. And then when suddenly there's a drop, right, known as a J curve, when there's a sudden drop, that the gap between that which they expect and that which they actually have grows, that brings about the revolution, right? The gap between what people are able to obtain and what they believe they should be able to obtain. As it grows, that turns into a crisis of rising expectations, which leads to a revolution. And some would perhaps argue that maybe in this week's parsha, what we are seeing is a revolution, because this was not just Korach. The nation itself seemed to be siding with Korach, which we're going to assess soon and address soon what exactly his issue was. But some would argue that, listen, this is a nation that had very high expectations. They received the Torah. They're on the way to their own homeland. Imagine that. You're a slave. You have no identity. You're not just a second-class citizen, but you are being afflicted day in, day out. You are released, you are freed, you are promised, and once you are promised, you have expectations. Every single ancestor of ours was expecting to make their way into the land of Israel within a couple days. Okay, there was a delay for a week, that they could accept. But to suddenly be told last week that, guess what? It's not going to be a few days, it's going to be a couple years. How long? 40 years. This was a great drop in their expectation, and there's suddenly that tremendous gap, which perhaps brings about revolution. That's one way of looking at it, but the truth is that this is not so much a revolution that was a grassroots movement, but rather it was a shrewd manipulation of circumstances by someone by the name of Korach. In other words, Korach was angry. There was a position that he wanted, right? There was great honor that he desired, and it was not given to him. He had an overwhelming internal struggle due to the fact that this position was not given to him. And at the right time, in other words, his anger already came into existence in Pareshat Bahalotcha. He was already an angry man, not 12, but one angry man. In Pareshat Bahalotcha, when positions on the 1st of Nisan are given to Moshe, Aharon, a cousin by the name of Elitzaphan, but not to him, he was fuming. But a shrewd fellow knows that you have to wait for the right time. If you want to go ahead and rebel, if you want to go ahead and take over that role, you have to do it at the right time. Timing is everything. And now, after the nation had this major disappointment, after the nation is informed that they are not going to a homeland, they're in the wilderness for 40 years, Korach saw this is an opportunity to go ahead and start the process of challenging the leadership of Moshe. So that is what is really taking place. This is an opportunity. You find a cause because you see that this is an opportunity. It's very possible, not that we're here to analyze politics, but south of the border, this Black Lives Matter movement, right? Which no one denies that there's a challenge for African Americans in the United States because they are stopped more often, right? No one could deny that it's not an easy thing, especially for the millions of them, right, who are doing their part, good citizens, and nevertheless, due to the color of their skin, police stop them more often. And obviously, if they walk into a store, people are more suspicious. It's a fact. But this is not new. And for 8 years, there was a president in the White House by the name of Barack Obama who happened to be Black. It was the same. There was no difference. And there was no rebellion, and there were no movements in the street. But now, on the other hand, when there is an agenda to try to destabilize due to the fact that they don't like the current administration, so this Black Lives Matter is more of an opportunity than an actual issue. Not that the issue doesn't exist, it's a problem, but it's someone that's trying to take an opportunity. That's the feeling that some of us have, because it wasn't perfect for the 8 years of the Obama administration. So that's finding an issue. And Korach felt, I here can find an issue. Now, rebellions look attractive. Why? When someone gets up and says, we're all good, right? It's not only the 1% that deserves the money. It's not only the 1% that deserves the honor. We're all the same. We're all equal, right? That is very attractive to the masses. Wow, someone is concerned about me, the simple person. That's a movement, right? He cares about me. That's what movements, right? Revolutionary movements are. And Korach made that declaration. When he gets up and he addresses the nation, he points at Moshe and he says, Moshe, he thinks he's the only holy one. He thinks that he is the only one who communicated with God. But the truth is, we're all holy. Wow, that's a sweet message, right? You're that little guy standing there in the crowd, and someone gets up and declares, you're wonderful, you're great, you're holy, you deserve what Moshe deserves. Kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim, right? We're not going to allow the money to be just by the few, it will be by the masses, right? We're going to go ahead and give every citizen, thousands of dollars a month. And here too, Korach declares, this is like a religious socialism. Everyone is holy, right? We don't need a Moshe Rabbeinu to guide us. The laws he makes up are absurd. And he started laughing at laws of Torah. And as the tradition points out, the parsha that appears right before Pareshat Korach has to do with tzitzit. Tzitzit, the fringes that are worn on garments, have in the past a blue string. Now, Korach turns to Moshe Rabbeinu and asks him the following question. If the garment is all blue, do you still need a blue string? And Moshe says yes. So he mocked that teaching. And he said, that's absurd. That is completely absurd. If one blue string is good enough to be considered a mitzvah for the whole garment, if the whole garment is blue, how much more so? He was mocking Moshe's teachings. And his claim was, why do we need this intellectual individual to tell us how to connect to God with mitzvot? We're all spiritual, right? We all had that experience at Sinai. We don't need Moshe. We're all equal. Now, if you're going to ask Korach, right, if you have the opportunity to ask Korach, wait a second, you're saying that they're all equal, but at the same time, you want to take over the role of leader. But how do you explain that, Korach, that you are getting up and claiming, Kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim, we're all equal, but at the same time, you want to take over that role of leadership, and you, as a result, will be considered more significant than others. How are you going to address it? So Korach will respond, yes, we're all equal, but some of us are more equal than others. Okay, and this is obviously George Orwell from The Animal Farm, where was the pig, if I'm not mistaken, the chazer, right? The Animal Farm was more a metaphor for communism, where the animals take over the farm, they get rid of the farmer, but the pig takes over that role, and he claims, listen, we're all equal, because that's what a revolution is, but some of us are more equal than others. My late father, Olav Shalom, learned in the Ner Yisrael of Baltimore, and he married my mother, who came from Telz, and there was always underlying humor. In other words, my father, here and there, we would pick up lines where he would, I'm not going to use the word mock, but he would comment about Telz. In other words, he was a proud Ner Yisrael Baltimore Talmud, and here and there he would make statements about Telz. And one of the statements that he made was that when they chose Roshei HaYeshiva in the 1960s, when one of the heads of the yeshiva passed away, they had to nominate new Roshei HaYeshiva in Telz in Cleveland. So it was a little bit of a challenge, because there were several son-in-laws of Roshei HaYeshiva, and then there was one great scholar known as the greatest of all in scholarship, in Torah knowledge, of greatest Talmid Chacham, by the name of Reb Chaim Stein. So there was a little bit of a challenge because on the one hand, they wanted family members to take over the role of heading the yeshiva. But on the other hand, everyone recognized that Reb Chaim Stein was the great Torah scholar. So they came up with a decision that there'll be 4 Roshei HaYeshiva. 3 of them will be son-in-laws, and the 4th one will be Reb Chaim Stein. And they said it will be equal, right? But as my father would put it, the way he would share that story from the 1960s, although they're going to be equal, some are going to be more equal than others. So that's what's meaning Reb Chaim Stein, after all, due to the fact that he wasn't family, he'll be a head of a yeshiva, he'll be equal, but not as equal as the others. This is how my father would comment about tells in a nice way. Again, a funny story, just a brief funny story, and then we'll get back to our learning. When I arrived in Chicago, in Tells, I was in Tells, so this is in 1986, and I needed to open a bank account. So I was told that all the yeshiva guys go to this little bank, and the reason they go to that bank is that they don't have a minimum balance. In other words, for a yeshiva boy, to have a $300 minimum balance is not doable. You don't have that extra $300. So that specific bank had no minimum balance. But I said, you know what? I'm going to try. What won't hurt? I'm going to go to one of the choshev, nice-looking banks that have leather couches, and I'm going to see how far I could get. So I still remember the bank. I went to Peterson Bank. I walk into this choshev-looking bank. I go to I schedule an appointment. I walk into the office of this woman, and I share with her the story that I want to open, an account in this well-respected, honorable bank. But I would like you not to, if you could work it out, no minimum balance. So she says, I'll call my manager. So the manager comes in and he's looking at my name, and he says, Malevsky. You're in Tells? You're in Tells? I was surprised that he was a Jew. And I said, yeah, Malevsky. Wait a second. Uziel Malevsky sent a son to Tells? That makes no sense. That's what the manager said. So story was that he knew my father from Baltimore Yeshiva, and he was shocked that I landed up in Tells. Main thing is I got the count there, but that's the side thing. So now let's get back to the revolution. So approach number 1 to go ahead and look at this parsha is as a revolutionary, but not so much that the nation is agitated. Yes, they are, but the cause is really someone with an opportunity. His name is Korach, and therefore he rebels against Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, what we're going to discuss today is the difference between how Hasidim and Musarites look at Korach. Okay, a Hasidic view of Korach and a view of Korach that originates in a Musar way of thinking, Baalei Musar, which we'll talk about soon. Now, the old joke is that Hasidim make from the Rasha a tzaddik, and the Baalei Musar, those who study Musar, which will very soon break down what exactly that is referring to, the Baalei Musar, on the other hand, take a tzaddik and make him into a Rasha. Now, let's explain it in a fair way. So number 1, what does it mean that Hasidim make from a Rasha a tzaddik? So you'll say, well, that means that when they look at someone, they want to see the good in everyone. They want to see the pintalayid, and they find the righteousness true. And I remember in Milwaukee, we were in Milwaukee, and I was the members of the kollel at time would give divrei Torah at Rabbi Twersky's home. So I was asked one Friday afternoon to give the women's class at Rabbi Twersky's home for the women of the community, and Rabbi Twersky was there at the time. And I talked about the fact that the statement made by Korach, Kol Aida Kulam Kedoshim, they're all holy, actually at a later point in history, became a statement made by our leader. What do I mean by that? Shmuel Hanavi, right? Shmuel Hanavi is born at a time that there is corruption in the priesthood, where the children of Eli believe that the position of being priest belongs to us. And therefore, the way the children of Eli looked at anyone that was there for services from the Kohanim as a nudge. Why are you bothering us? We are the royal family. Don't bother the royal family. So this was a complete corruption of power. And Shmuel Hanavi was born into that environment with an understanding that that is wrong. That if you are a leader, your goal is to do what they need. And it's not about you. And therefore, the Tanakh and the Talmud points out that when Shmuel Hanavi would go from place to place to inspire the people of Israel, the prophet would not take anything from the locals. He would take everything with him. He would never take anything from others, because he believed that if I'm here to inspire, to teach, to guide, this is not a position for my sake, it is for their sake. That was Shmuel Hanavi. So the complete opposite of someone that is seeking power. And therefore, for Shmuel, when later in his life, right, the nation made a request for a king, he turns to them and he says, do you really want a royal family? You know how it is with these royal families. It's about them. You have to give them your children. You're going to have to pay taxes. That's not the Jewish way of leadership. The Jewish way of leadership is that the leader is nothing for himself, like me. Shmuel Hanavi was a proper manifestation of Kol Ha'edah Kulam Kedoshim. They're all holy. And what's fascinating is that Shmuel was a descendant of Korach. And according to rabbinic tradition, Korach even had a vision of this Shmuel because he related to that way of thinking. He related to the way of thinking that, you know what? Everyone is holy. Now, obviously, Korach and that statement was unfortunately not used appropriately, but manipulated for his sake. You're all holy, give me the power. But on the other hand, the descendant Shmuel took those same statements, the same way of thinking, and used it in the proper way. You're all holy. Don't have leaders that think about themselves. Those who seek power to feel good, right, for their own ego, that's not leadership. Leadership is concerned for every single individual. That is Shmuel Hanavi. So I mentioned this Dvar Torah by Rabbi Tursky, and Rabbi Tursky shared with me that by Hasidim, they call Korach the Heilike Zayde Korach, the holy grandfather Korach. Now this is very Hasidic. Hasidic, at least in its early days, right, was a popular movement where at the time respect was only given to the scholar and the farmer was perhaps looked down at. And the Hasidic movements, made it very clear, and obviously it's a tremendous contribution that all of us should walk away with, that there's holiness in every Jew, that the service of the simple Jew is beloved to the Almighty just as the service of the great scholar. And if someone has no idea how to pray, but he cries out of his heart, that is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. So the Hasidic movement related very much to this idea, everyone's holy, right? And perhaps in the early days, the Hasidic movement did not have royal families. That showed up a little bit later, right? But in the early days of the Hasidic movement, everyone, right? The holiness is what you create, not something you inherit from your father, right? Or from your grandfather. So by Hasidim, the concept Kol Ha'edah Kulam Kedoshim, right, is a motto that brought them to make the statement that Korach was the Heilike Zayde Korach. So that is taking the Rasha, meaning Korach, which bottom line is, he used and manipulated, and he was an evildoer, but they find righteousness in the Rasha. They make the Rasha into a tzaddik. But now it's time to study a little bit about what the Baalei Musar do. The Baalei Musar, what they do is, and it has its place, they claim that if you look at a human even those things he does that are good, if you analyze it carefully, odds are there's some negative drive. And that negative drive, right, that the ego, right, the desire, the jealousy, that little bit of negative that is within his behavior, if it is not kept in check, if you do not control it properly, it will take over the being. And even the good deed could become one that is evil. And therefore, the Musarites will focus on a flaw to identify a human flaw. And what they are telling you is be mindful of it. Be mindful of it. Now, obviously, if you focus too much on Musar, you're going to be creating a society that is very problematic. Because if you start telling people that everything you do has a little bit of bad and focus on that bad, they're going to destroy the development of Yiddishkeit, which Musarites have, by the way, in many ways. Let's face it. They've caused a lot of churban by this Musar approach. But on the other hand, there is truth to it as well, that we have to be careful that when there's an ego that is driving, and it appears to me that I'm doing these tremendous mitzvahs and I'm inspiring, but it's my ego, that could bring about a destruction. That is true. So that's what we're going to go ahead and study a few words of one of the Balei Musar, but one that talks to me, that I consider, when I read his works, I feel that he is one I could relate to, and that's Reb Chatzkel Sarna. Reb Chatzkel Sarna. So that's who we're going to go ahead and focus on today, okay? And he's going to be our Musar. Let me see let's see if I can open this up a little bit better. Okay, so here's our Reb Chatzkel Sarna for the day. Okay, what you have in front of you is, what I want to study is a statement that appears in the Talmud in Sota. It's a statement in the Talmud. And it's a rabbinic reading of 2 verses of the Torah and a very fascinating insight. So here we go. The first reference you see is a conversation that is taking place between the Almighty and Moshe Rabbeinu, where Moshe Rabbeinu is begging HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this is taking place in the book of Dvarim, Pareshat Korach, where Moshe is informed he's not making his way into the land of Israel. He turns to the Almighty in prayer, and this is intense prayer by the man who reached the highest level of communication with the Almighty. And it reaches a point that God says to him, Moshe, Ginuk. Vayomer Hashem Elai. Hashem says to Moshe, this is Moshe sharing with us what occurred. Ravlach, enough for you, enough. I had enough. Al Tosef Daber Elai Od Badavar Hazeh. Stop talking to me about it. I could compare it to a nudgy child that knows very well that if they nudge enough, they'll get it. So Kivyochol, Moshe Rabbeinu's relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu was such that HaKadosh Baruch Hu felt that if he's going to continue with prayer, how can I say no to Moshe Rabbeinu? So therefore, he turns to him and he says, "No, Ginuk. It got to stop. Al Tosef Elai Daber Elai Od Badavar Hazeh." Now, the 2 words that I underline are Ravlach. In other words, when Moshe Rabbeinu is informed that unfortunately you're not going to make your way into the land of Israel, Ravlach. Remember those 2 words. Now, the second verse, and all this is, we are preparing ourselves to read a statement in the Talmud that is going to bring together 2 verses. So here's the second verse. The second verse appears in this week's portion when the test to show who is the chosen one relates to a fire pan with the incense. And this is something that Moshe Rabbeinu tells the 250 and Korach to do. And he says to them, you know what Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Levites? right? You are asking for too much. In other words, you Levites, you already have a position that other members of Klal Yisrael don't have. You Levites who are rebelling, right? You Levites, and not just Korach, but there were others from the tribe of Levi who wanted more. You people, right, who want more. Rav lachem bnei Levi. Genuk. In other words, you're asking for too much. Rav lachem bnei Levi. Okay? So here comes the statement in the Talmud. And the Talmud in the statement is, the Talmud is going to say the following. You should know, Moshe Rabbeinu was informed the bad news that he's not going to make his way into the land of Israel with the words Ravlach. Why specifically did the Almighty choose those two words to communicate to him that you're not going to get more than what you have, meaning you're not going to make your way into the land of Israel? That is because Moshe used those two words to communicate to the Levim to not ask for more. Amar Rabbi Levi, Berav, with the word Rav, Biser. Biser means Moshe Rabbeinu informed the Levites that they don't deserve more with the word Rav. And therefore, Midah Keneged Midah, corresponding to his usage of those words, Berav Bisruhu. Moshe Rabbeinu was informed by the Almighty, you're not going to be making your way into the land of Israel with the words Ravlach. Berav Biser Rav Lachem, Berav Bisru Ravlach. Okay? Now, these are some incredible words because when Moshe Rabbeinu told the Levites, you have enough, he was basically saying, put an end to this rebellion against me and God. Why on earth, we ask, why on earth were those words used against him when after all he used them, Rav Lachem Bnei Levi, in a very appropriate setting, right? So why is it used against him? Okay, so this is a question that Reb Chatzkel Sarna is going to address. Reb Chatzkel Sarna was in the Slabotka Yeshiva. In 1924, he was among those who were sent to establish the yeshiva in Hebron. After he was there during the terrible tragedy of the 1929 massacre. He, in essence, led the yeshiva afterwards as they transferred to Yerushalayim and headed the yeshiva from 1930 until his passing in 1969, was considered one of the great Roshei HaYeshiva, Balei Musar, a person that was a humanist, great respect for what was happening in the land of Israel, a fellow that was overwhelmed by what occurred in the Six-Day War. According to some, even had a desire to return the yeshiva to Hebron in 1967, but got a no from Moshe Dayan. That's the story. So we're going to study some words of Reb Chatzkel Sarna, which are important, but we'll address our issue as well. So here we go. Now, Reb Chatzkel Sarna tells us that you should know, Bechol ha-mitzvot, when it comes to all mitzvot, haklal, you know what the rule is? Le'olam ya'asok adam betorah u'bemitzvot, a person should always be involved in Torah and mitzvos, afilu shelo lishma, even if it is not for the sake of heaven. Why? Shemitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. Things eventually evolve, things eventually approve. So even though originally when you started off, it was not for the sake of heaven, eventually it becomes for the sake of heaven. So let's say, for example, a high school has a requirement that every student do X amount of hours of chesed. So the students do chesed. If you would ask the 16-year-old, why are you doing chesed, they would say it's a requirement of the school. So that is called shelo lishma, not for the sake of heaven, not because they recognize the value of doing for others, but rather they need to get their credit. But then after doing it for a year and a half, and they mature and they have trained themselves to do acts of kindness, right? To not be selfish. So actually when they graduate, they'll continue doing it in university, continue doing it later in life, even when they are working, because they got training. Mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, the study of Torah is valuable. So yes, earlier on we do it because we got to get that grade, or earlier on you do it because you want perhaps people to honor you, but eventually shelo lishma turns into lishma. So therefore, the first statement is, in Judaism, do things if they are right, even if your intentions are not 100% pure. Do acts of kindness, call people, study Torah, daven, do those good things. Think about others, say a kind word, even if your intention is not for the sake of heaven. It's good, it's great, it's wonderful. However, says Reb Chatzkel Sarna, there is one area in Jewish practice where if you're not for the sake of heaven, don't you dare do it. And therefore he tells us the following. When it comes to machloket, when it comes to causing a dispute, causing a fight, right? Afilu b'makom, even in a situation she mitzvah, where technically it's a mitzvah. Now you're going to ask, how on earth can a machloket be a mitzvah? Kegon, the example would be lachlok al hareshaim ve'akofrim. Imagine you're in a situation where you're in a town and there is someone that got up and declared that the Shabbos is not such an important thing. Kashrut is not so important, right? So obviously you have to set the record straight. So technically speaking, you would say it's a mitzvah to go ahead and get up and say the so-and-so who said that, he is 100% wrong, right? And even though you know that it's going to cause a tumult and CJN all of a sudden is going to write an article about it, on the surface, it's a mitzvah. Tells us Reb Chatzkel Sarna that you should know. When it comes to machloket, mitzvata hi rak lishma. Only if it is for the sake of heaven, only then you should go ahead and do it. On the other hand, let's say there's a specific individual who I don't like, and then he gets up and he says something that is wrong, and I am so happy that finally I could criticize him publicly for what he said. I feel good because now I'm doing a mitzvah. That is not lishma. That's not for the sake of heaven. That's for the sake of my ego, because I want to feel good. Says Reb Chatzkel Sarna, when it comes to machloket, shelo lishma, when it's not for the sake of heaven, or when it is not purely for the sake of heaven, asurahi isur gamur. It is completely prohibited to get up and make an issue, to get up and make a fight, right? Even in circumstances where you're dealing with rishaim, with evildoers. If it is not 100% for the sake of heaven, don't you dare do it. Vehatamu, and if you ask why, in other words, why is it that in general, when it comes to mitzvot, we say even those things that are not for the sake of heaven are still good, but when it comes to machloket, when it comes to a fight, we don't say that. Mipnei shebemachloket, he says to us the following, that when it comes to a machloket, ein haklal, the rule is not applicable. Shemitoch shelo lishma yavo lishma. That rule is not true. But you want to know what the rule is when it comes to the machloket? Ela shemitoch shelo lishma. When it comes to machloket, if you do it, if I get up and make an issue, and make a dispute, and make a fight, if it's not lo lishma, if it's lo lishma, you know what's going to happen? Titgaber esh hamachloket. The fire of machloket will grow. V'tachriv et ha'olam. Listen to those words. Tachriv et ha'olam. It will destroy the world. Even in a situation that someone did something wrong, if I get up and criticize him, if I get up and make an issue, if I get up and write an article, if I do it not completely for the sake of heaven, you are destroying the world, says Reb Chatzkel Sarna. Now, what Reb Chatzkel Sarna is going to do to make that point is analyze Pareshat Korach. And what he's going to claim is that Korach's journey started off as a righteous journey. In other words, Korach's desire for authority, for power, started off as something good, right? You could compare it to the following. Imagine you have a student in the yeshiva who excels in his studies. He excels. He's a tremendous Torah scholar. He learns well, right? Other students turn to him for guidance. And then as he continues growing, he has more of a following. And then eventually at some point, there is a need for a new head of the yeshiva. So he already is expecting to be chosen for the position. He comes to yeshiva that day with a nice starch shirt and with his cufflinks. And when he walks in, he's informed that someone else got the position. Now, he really, really feels that the fellow who got it, it's not so much what he knows, but it is who he knows. And it bothers him. So now, within him, he also has the feeling, wait a second, I could inspire more students, right? In other words, if I head the yeshiva, I have the ability to inspire more. Judaism will benefit more if I'm the head of the yeshiva. So therefore, I'm going to go ahead and inform students that I'm breaking away and I'm creating my own group within the yeshiva, or perhaps a different yeshiva. I'm going to create a machloket because I believe that that's better for Torah. So comes Reb Chatzkel Sarna and he says the following. If that fellow is 100% for the sake of heaven, perhaps. But the truth is, in 99.999% of the times, there's an ego there. Meaning, yes, he's concerned about Torah, and yes, he does really feel that for the continuity of Judaism, he has more to offer. But the fact is, being called Rosh Hashiva is honorable, right? You come in, people stand up, you get a long coat, right? You're honored at a wedding, they call you up, everyone wants to know your name. So there is kavod there as well, there's honor. So Reb Chatzkel says, due to the fact that honor is playing a role, don't you dare make a machloket. Because even Korach started off as that Rosh Hashiva. His desire for power was righteous. His desire for more of a role, to have more of an impact, that started off as something good. Yes, there was an ego, but that was minor. The problem with Korach was that he made it to do when a percentage, even though it was a small one, was not for the sake of heaven. And therefore, what Reb Chatzkel Sarna tells us is that you should know, when you analyze that statement in the Talmud, remember that statement in the Talmud where Rabbi Levi tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was in some ways rebuked for using the words Rav Lachem Bnei Levi, you guys got enough. The reason he was rebuked for telling the Levites, you guys got enough, don't desire more, was because their desire for more was actually for the sake of heaven. Because Korach was a complex individual. There were elements within him and within his movement that wanted more spiritually, wanted to bring God into the world more. They felt they could inspire more. There was an element that was, yes, for the sake of heaven. The problem was, says Reb Chatzkel, the problem was that there was a percentage that was not for the sake of heaven. And when it comes to machloket, if it is not 100% pure, you're going to destroy the world, right? And therefore think about it, and I think unfortunately many of us have the ability to walk through our history of different synagogues, of different organizations, of machloketin that occurred. And in most cases, the individuals were actually good people. But nevertheless, it brought about destruction and fights, right? I know a little bit from my father. My father never talked to me about his years in Eretz Yisrael on Finch. But I do know that there was a machloket there. I do know that there was fighting. And it wasn't pleasant for him. It wasn't pleasant for him. And he once in a while, I would hear a statement. And I sensed that it was a painful time during his life. Now, clearly, the parties involved, right, were people that were interested in Torah and they wanted to promote Torah, and they had tremendous talents, very charismatic leaders. But at the same time, machloket, bottom line is, in this day and age, due to the fact that no one nowadays is completely for the sake of heaven, machloket has no room at all in our table of Judaism. No room for it. Meaning in a situation where a person feels I deserve the position but steps back, that's the right thing to do. You know that Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky was the head of a great yeshiva in New York by the name of Torah Vadas. In the 1960s, he headed it with another great rabbi by the name of Gedalia Shar. They had different outlooks. And at some point, I think it was in the late 1960s, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky packed up and said, I'm leaving, goodbye. And he didn't share with anyone why. Some believe that he had a little bit of a disagreement with Rav Gedalia Shar. He easily, due to the fact that he was a senior rabbi and he was more respected, he easily could have worked it out for himself there at Torah Vadas. But Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky felt, you know what? Machlokas, not worth it. True, I could inspire more students in the future. Clearly, he had the ability to do so. He just walked away and never spoke about it. And the explosion that could have occurred did not occur because he was a great man. The great man walks away from machloket, no desire. If there's an issue, he packs his bags, he vanishes because he knows that even if it is quote unquote l'shem shamayim, he knows that if there is little bit there that is not, that's going to bring about the destruction. He followed the teachings of the Baalei Musar. So what the Baalei Musar do in this case is that they point out that Korach started off as a good person. But that good person, if he does not control, right, that evil inclination, the desire for honor, it will bring about a destruction. And that's the sad story of Korach, right? Korach, if you look at the Mishnah, Machloket Shileshem Shamayim, Hillel and Shammai, they were 100% for the sake of heaven. Machloket Shiloleshem Shamayim, it means that, yes, it was a machloket that most of it was for the sake of heaven, but there was a small percentage. And when you make a machloket, right, and there's that little bit that's not for the sake of heaven, the destruction is the result. So that's the lesson that great rabbis want us to take from Pareshat Korach, and to recognize the value of peace, the value of shalom, and to think 100 times before we say something about others, say something about other authorities in town, right? And it's something that comes to mind for me. In other words, you know, when in a town we have many great rabbis here in Toronto that do a tremendous amount of good. Let's be careful anything we utter about any of them, because reality is, machloket, in the words of Reb Chatzkel Sarna, is esh, is fire. And as we all know, when there's fire, you can't control the winds, and the destruction could be great. So let's keep up the shalom, and in the merit of shalom, have indeed shalom al Yisrael. That's what we could hope for. And I thank everyone. I'm going to end the recording now, so good day to all.